birthday from the Element Well studio. Glad to be with you. It's been a fast-paced, fun morning on this Friday, heading into the afternoon. Appreciate everybody that's listening. Looking forward to that weekend. Beautiful day in the SIP. Good weekend of college football right around the corner. Mississippi State playing Arkansas. The line is moving. Is that right, Rhino?
Yeah, it seems more and more like Vegas is favoring the Bulldogs, so it'll be an interesting start to the Saturday.
Arkansas's quarterback, K.J. Jefferson, a Mississippian, is likely out, and that definitely, I would think, would help the chances. But the Bulldogs are looking good for that one. Ole Miss is traveling up to Nashville for the Fighting Commodores. I would hope we would win that one after a nice 5-0 run to start the season. Hotty toddy. And USM is playing Troy, right?
I believe so.
So good weekend of college football in front of us. We've talked about some bad stuff going on in Jackson, stuff that obviously is causing pain to citizens. We've had a good conversation with Alice Marie Johnson about her life story, her story of redemption coming out of prison. And I do think it's inspirational. I think she does great work. It's Friday, though, and we got football right around the corner. And high school football, that's available on SuperTalk tonight. Good coverage of that with the scoreboard preview show at 6 p.m. tonight. And, nothing goes better with football in this time of year than some really, really good barbecue. I'm a barbecue guy, and we've got Malcom Reed, who's an even better barbecue guy, on the line with us. Malcolm, great to have you on, man.
Hey, Russ, how's it going, man?
It is going great. I'm a big fan of your barbecue rub. I use it on all sorts of stuff, man. The original barbecue rub you guys sell, I'll mix it with some stuff sometimes, but it is great on ribs.
I appreciate it, man. It's always good to hear people using something, but, it means a lot to us, and we enjoy making the videos and helping everybody out.
Yeah, no, it's definitely helpful. Like watching your videos. Heath Riles is a Mississippian too, isn't he?
Oh, yeah, that's my buddy. He's over here in Olive Branch, just one town over from us, really, so I talk to him all the time.
And Heath does some incredible stuff, both of y'all on YouTube. If you want to learn how to barbecue, watch Malcolm and Heath on YouTube. And candidly, I mix y'all's rubs. He's got that jalapeno garlic butter rub, and I'll mix that with that the original barbecue rub that you've got on some ribs. And it is fine eating after a low and slow. I wanted to talk to you today, though, not about pork, which is generally what people think about in Mississippi as barbecue. I got a wife that grew up in Texas, and brisket is king out there. Brisket is a heck of a lot harder to cook than pork is. Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. That brisket's a tough piece of meat. That's what the deal is. It does a lot of work, It's right there on the chest of that cow, and it uses it every single step it takes. So that's what makes it so tough. It's a working muscle.
So I thought today we might give some insight to listeners who maybe they've never tackled a brisket before and don't even know how to start, or maybe they've done that dreaded brisket smoke after 13, 14, 15 hours, and it is dry and it is impossible to eat, or it's not getting cut the right way. And just walk through the process. When you're about to smoke a award-winning brisket, what are the steps that you take?
Well, you hit on a few of them there. It's about keeping the moisture in the meat and, when it's done, cutting it against the grain. But I like to start, in that Texas tradition, it's that salt and pepper. And it's a coarse salt and a coarse pepper that I like to use. That's really the only two things you need for good brisket. It puts a good bark on the outside. So what I do is I do a light trim on it. Brisket has some fat on it, but it's not all good fat. So you want to get off any of the softer fat that's not going to render. So I trim it down to about a 1/4 inch, and I leave that little bit on the bottom of each slice, and that's what's really going to add your moisture back to the brisket. Now, you have two options of how you want to cook it once you get it seasoned. You can cook it fat side up, which is the way they do it in Texas often, or you can cook it fat side down. What I tell people is it depends on where your heat's coming from in your smoker is the way you should orient that fat. Once you get it on the pit, it's about getting some color on it, setting that bark. And that just means adding some good smoke. In Mississippi, we got an abundance of hickory wood, so that's often what you see used. They use post oak out in Texas, but you can also use pecan or something, or a little bit, maybe a little fruit wood. But traditionally, it's post oak or hickory. Once it's got about 4 or 5 hours of smoke, that bark will be looking good on the outside. That's when we're going to get it tender. That's how we're going to keep it moist. We're going to wrap it up. You can wrap it up in aluminum foil, add a little beef broth in there, or some butter for some added moisture, some added fat. Or you can wrap it up in butcher paper is what they do a lot in Texas. And what that butcher paper does, it allows that bark to kind of breathe. It doesn't trap as much moisture in it. So you get more of that meteorite texture, that crispy bark on the outside. People like that. But I do both. In competitions, we use foil because we want it super moist. But at home, I do it with the paper. Once you get it cooked, you got to take brisket all the way up to at least 202 degrees internal. And you got to do it slow. That's what's going to dry your brisket out, is rushing this process. So what I do is I put a meat probe in it in the thickest part of the flat, which is the front part. And then that meat probe, I set it for 202, and I don't mess with that smoker other than maintaining temp. Don't open it, let heat out. Once it goes off a temp, you're not done. You get it off the pit, and you stick it down in a cooler without ice, a dry cooler, and put an old towel or an old blanket in there, something to take up some space. And you want to let that dude sit for 2 to 4 hours in that cooler on no heat. That's what's going to let that brisket absorb moisture back down in the meat, and that's going to make it juicier.
Yeah, I find that the biggest mistakes that I've ever made smoking one is when I get impatient and decide I'm going to try and rush the process. Now, I know the Texas crutch that you've described, either with foil or with the butcher paper certainly helps, and I don't consider that rushing the process. But, sometimes people get impatient and they'll start cranking up heat, adding more fuel to the fire, or, to your point, not letting it rest, and then you end up in trouble. One of our texters here asked the question, and I think this is a great question: how do you pick a good brisket? Are you doing Snake River Farms Wagyu, or is there a way to pick a good brisket that maybe doesn't break the bank?
So when we cook competition barbecue, we're trying to get that best bite, so we do go for the Wagyu brisket, that more expensive brisket. But when I'm cooking them at home just to eat with family and friends, or watching a football game, having people over to the house, I usually go for one that I get at Sam's or Kroger or Walmart even. But what I look for is a brisket that has a little bit of age on it. And I'm not talking about close to spoiling, but I'm talking about loosening up in the packaging. When you go to the grocery store, you go to one of the big club stores, you can pick up multiple briskets and feel them. Now, that brisket, when it's fresh, when they first pack it, it's stiff as a board. It hadn't had time to break down. But after it's, been in the box in refrigeration or out on the shelf for, a few days, it starts to loosen up. That lactic acid starts breaking down in those muscle fibers, and it gets more pliable. So when you pick it up and you kind of support it in the middle, it'll drape over your hands. And that's what you want to see. You don't want to see air bubbles in there or any discoloration, but you want that brisket to be loose when you pick it up.
So we're talking about brisket with Malcom Reed, who is an expert on this subject. Essentially what you're saying, clean up the fat cap, trim it up a little bit, make sure you got no random little edges sticking out here and there, because those are going to burn up on you. Maybe get that fat cap down to about 1/4 of an inch?
That's exactly what I go for.
And then in terms of smoking, this fat cap conversation will start wars sometimes, but it's really just a matter of where the heat's coming from. So am I right in saying if you've got like a Kamado or a Big Green Egg or something like that that's a vertical smoker, you want to put that fat cap down, and if you've got an offset smoker, you want to put that fat cap up? Is that generally?
That's exactly how I do it. I think you get a better product. That fat's going to protect you from that heat coming right at it.
And then it's just a matter of having a cold beer, or if you don't drink beer, a cold soft drink or 6, and waiting, right?
That's it. Brisket is it's a labor of love. You can't rush a good brisket. You got to give yourself plenty of time. And when you think you want to serve it, go ahead and add a couple more hours, because it's better as you hold it.
Do you I have started to do this, and I end up with what I think is a better smoke ring, is I will spray it down about every hour. I'll just spritz it with some water. And like you, only use black pepper and salt because that's all you need. But do you do something like that to get the smoke to stick, so to speak?
Well, I spritz it as needed. I know that you can notice as that brisket's cooking, the moisture will start coming to the surface. And the dry spots is really what I'm concentrating on. Keeping that moisture over the surface of it helps that smoke adhere to it and helps it absorb. And it does help that reaction that's happening in the meat, to give you that pretty pink smoke ring.
We're talking with Malcom Reed. Malcom, can you hang on one more segment? I want to talk about the dreaded stall, and then I want to talk about ways once you get that perfect brisket and it's ready to be sliced up that you can use it for some good eats.
Absolutely.
We will be right back. You're listening to Middays with Gerard Gibbert. Russ Latino filling in from the LMO. We've got some great C Spire text line comments on the barbecue. People love them some Malcom Reed and like the advice that they are getting. If you want to be a part of the conversation, you can join us on the C Spire text line at 601-879-4395. Malcom, welcome back, man. Thank you for being with us today.
Yes, sir. Glad to be here, man. Love talking barbecue.
I know that we've got people getting in their cars to head to lunch right now, and then maybe they're starting to think about what they're going to put on the smoker or the grill this weekend. We've been talking about brisket. One of the things I'm not sure we emphasized is when you put that brisket on the smoker, you got to have a really good quality calibrated meat thermometer that's going to tell you how you're doing, right?
Yeah, to me, that meat thermometer is as important as the smoker you're using. That's a tool that's going to help you turn out a good product in the end. I mean, if you're not using one, you're just guessing.
And then, part of that, if you got that meat thermometer in, at some point you're going to get frustrated because it's going to seem like that bad boy is climbing in temperature and getting close to where you want it to be. And it's going to get right to about 160, 170 degrees, and it's just going to stop moving. And they call that the stall. What advice do you have for people as that starts?
Well, it happens every time, and there's no magical rule where it's going to happen. Usually it is about 160, 170 degrees, but you got to just power through it. So using that crutch that we talked about earlier, wrapping it up in foil or wrapping it in butcher paper, helps speed it up some, but you've got to give it time, and it just means sit there and wait and watch. Don't give up. Don't think. I mean, eventually it's going to hang out in that stall. It could be an hour, could be 2-3 hours. But once it starts climbing, you're going to notice it. If you've got that thermometer in there, you can see it start ticking up. And you can watch it every 5 minutes, 10 minutes. It's going to gain degrees. And that's what you want to see. That's when you know it's climbing. It's broke through that stall, and it's going to keep pushing forward to that finished gold temp.
So, Buddy Thomas in Greenwood has asked the question, can you recommend a reasonably priced offset smoker that doesn't lose a lot of heat?
Well, I mean, offset smokers typically are a little more expensive because you're paying for that thicker steel you're getting. But if I was looking at getting one, I would go to Academy, check out some of those that they have outside. Those are good pits. I've seen some there. I just stay away from the super thin wall stuff. They're not going to last. They don't hold heat well at all. But the biggest thing that helps me on an offset smoker is making sure I buy one that on the firebox end of it, where you put your coals and where you add your wood, you've got airflow. You've got to be able to get air into that end of the pit. You've got to have the coals raised so the ash has somewhere to fall, and then it's got to be able to get out of the pit. You're controlling it with your smokestack on the far end. That's what's going to help you there. I mean, they make gasket sealer like for oven doors you can put on the cook chamber doors to help seal it up. But it's all about airflow and getting the proper oxygen to those hot coals to get it to pull through that pit.
Bubba in Starkville mentioned when you're wrapping it in that butcher paper to use that pink butcher paper that doesn't have the wax coating on it. And I think that's probably pretty good advice versus using the stuff that's got that sort of like cookie sheet coating that you find on some of those parchment papers and whatnot. Well, let me ask you this. We're right up against the end of this bad boy, but if you've just cooked the perfect brisket, other than eating it sliced or other than eating it on a sandwich, what you going to do with it as we get to game time?
Well, I like making those little sliders and piling it up with cheese and putting some caramelized onions and mushrooms on top of it. You can't go wrong with that. You can make a brisket dip sandwich. We even do a lot of brisket tacos at my house where you cook it, just that salt and pepper crust on the outside, that bark still goes great with like Mexican flavors and makes some heck of a tacos.
Yeah, the brisket tacos, phenomenal idea. Brisket nachos are good too to stick with that Mexican theme. Obviously, you can load it up with whatever you want to load it up with, nacho cheese, guacamole, etc. What would you tell somebody who's getting started with a brisket? The first time they ever cooked it.
If you've never cooked a brisket or a piece of meat this technique, this way, long, low, and slow, I suggest starting out with a chuck roast first. I know it's not a brisket, but it cooks like one, and it's way less expensive. So you can get the technique down where you can get that bark on the outside of the roast. You get it wrapped up and then get it cooked until it's tender. When you feel like you've got the feel down to where you know you're taking it far enough, the meat's tender, then go buy an expensive brisket. Because a brisket, even a regular one at Kroger or anywhere, is about $50. That's a large investment. You don't want to ruin $50. But when you decide to tackle it, take your time, give yourself plenty of time, get the smoke on it for 4 or 5 hours, wrap it up, cook it till it's 202 internal, and rest it for 2 to 4 hours, and you can't go wrong.
And when you're ready to tackle it, go on YouTube, type in Malcom Reed, brisket, and watch him do it, and I'll teach you what you need to know. Malcolm, man, we are so glad to have you on. Well, what we need to do is get you up here to cook for us at some point.
Hey, I would love to, Russ, man. You know, I love my SuperTalk family. Appreciate everybody listening. You guys do a tremendous job there, man.
Thank you, man. You are listening to Middays with Gerard Gibbert. That was Malcom Reed, Killer Hog Barbecue. Good stuff, great products. How to barbecue right. You can find them on the YouTube. Russ Latino filling in for Gerard on the Element Well studio. We will be back momentarily.